The Mockery begins. The twin suns of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across the Coalition military base as Sergeant Marcus Chen stepped off the transport shuttle, his gear bag slung over one shoulder and his rifle case gripped firmly in the other hand. The humid air hit him like a wall, thick with the scent of alien vegetation and ozone from the base's energy barriers. So this is the human contribution to our elite strike force? The voice belonged to Commander Zixtal, a towering Zephyrian whose blue-scaled hide gleamed in the afternoon light. His forearms gestured dismissively as Chen approached the briefing area. I was expecting someone more substantial. A ripple of what passed for laughter echoed from the assembled alien soldiers. The Karathi warriors, each standing nearly 3 meters tall with their crystalline exoskeletons, clicked their mandibles in amusement. The serpentine Vextai coiled and uncoiled their muscular bodies in patterns that Chen had learned indicated contempt. Respect, Commander, Chen replied calmly, setting down his cases and offering the traditional Galactic Coalition salute. Sergeant Marcus Chen, 2nd Battalion Rangers, Terra Defense Force, reporting for joint operations duty. Captain Veltar, a Karathi whose crystal formations showed the deep purple of a seasoned veteran, stepped forward. His optical sensors focused on Chen with mechanical precision. We've read your species' military files, human. Your physical capabilities are limited. No natural armor, weak musculature, poor sensory organs. How exactly do you expect to contribute to precision military operations? Chen began unpacking his equipment methodically. I suppose we'll find out, sir. The aliens crowded around as Chen assembled his rifle, a human-designed M2A4 precision rifle that looked almost primitive compared to the sleek energy weapons and smart projectile systems the Coalition forces carried. The weapon was largely mechanical, with only basic electronic components for range-finding and environmental compensation. That's it? Lieutenant Krexlan, a young Zephyrian, pointed at the rifle with obvious disdain. Where's the targeting AI? The auto-correction systems? The molecular disruptors? Don't need them, Chen replied, running a practiced hand along the weapon's barrel. This fires a 7.62mm tungsten core projectile at roughly 850 meters per second. Effective range depends on conditions, but I can work with it out to about 3 kilometers. The aliens exchanged glances that clearly communicated their skepticism. Commander Zixtal's neck frills flared, a sign of barely contained amusement. 3 kilometers? With that antique? Our plasma rifles can engage targets at 15 kilometers with perfect accuracy. Yes, sir, I've seen the specifications. Impressive technology. Yet you prefer this primitive projectile weapon? Chen shouldered his rifle, feeling the familiar weight settle into place. Through the scope, he could see the target range nearly 2 kilometers away, where standard Coalition training targets were set up. Every tool has its purpose, Commander. Sometimes the old ways work just fine. The Mockery continued throughout the day as Chen participated in equipment inspections and tactical briefings. The mission was straightforward. Insurgent forces had taken control of an abandoned mining facility about 50 kilometers from the base. Intelligence indicated approximately 200 hostiles, well armed with stolen Coalition weapons and protected by adaptive energy shields that could deflect most standard military hardware. The insurgents have been particularly clever, Captain Veltar explained, his optical array projecting tactical holograms of the target area. Their shielding systems adapt to energy-based attacks within seconds. Our plasma weapons become ineffective after the first few shots. What about kinetic penetrators? Chen asked, studying the facility's layout. Limited effectiveness. Their shields can absorb and redistribute kinetic energy as well, though not as efficiently as directed energy. Commander Zixtal's forearms gestured at the holographic display. This is why we're deploying in overwhelming numbers with rotating weapon frequencies. We'll cycle through different energy signatures faster than their shields can adapt. And if that doesn't work? Then we level the facility with orbital bombardment. Though Command prefers we recover the stolen equipment intact, Chen nodded, noting several elevated positions around the mining complex. What about Overwatch positions, covering fire for the assault teams? Our doctrine emphasizes rapid, coordinated assault. We don't typically employ static sniper positions, too vulnerable to counter-battery fire and lacking in mobility. The Human Sergeant said nothing, but his eyes remained fixed on the tactical display, calculating ranges, wind patterns, and sight lines with the instinctive precision that had made him one of Earth's most decorated marksmen. That evening, as the alien soldiers tested their equipment and synchronized their targeting systems, Chen sat quietly cleaning his rifle. The simple, methodical process of disassembly, inspection, and reassembly was almost meditative. Each component was checked, each surface cleaned, each tolerance verified by touch and sight rather than computer diagnostic. Still playing with your toy, human? Lieutenant Krexlon had approached with several of his squad mates, all wearing expressions of amused superiority. Maintaining my equipment, Chen replied without looking up. This rifle belonged to my grandfather. He used it in the Martian colonial wars. My father carried it during the Europa uprising. Now it's mine. A family heirloom? How quaint, but surely you realize that sentiment has no place in modern warfare. Chen finally looked up, meeting the young Zephyrian's 4 eyes with steady calm. No, Lieutenant. This rifle has killed over 300 enemies across 3 generations of my family. It's not sentiment, it's proven effectiveness. The aliens laughed, their various forms of amusement creating a cacophony of clicks, hisses, and harmonic vibrations. But Chen simply returned to his work, checking the rifle's action one final time before beginning the process of hand-loading his ammunition, another primitive practice that drew more mockery from his alien comrades. Tomorrow would bring the assault, and with it, the chance to prove that sometimes the oldest tools were still the sharpest. Underestimated prey. The pre-dawn air crackled with energy as coalition forces prepared for the assault on the mining facility. Dropships hummed overhead, their gravitational dampeners creating ripples in the morning mist. Chen watched from his position as the alien soldiers made final equipment checks, their advanced targeting systems interfacing with orbital reconnaissance satellites to provide real-time battlefield data. Remember, human, Commander Zixtal's voice came through the comm system. Maintain distance and observe. This operation requires precision and coordination, qualities your primitive equipment cannot provide. Understood, sir. Chen adjusted his position on the rocky outcrop he'd selected nearly 3 kilometers from the target. Through his scope, the mining facility looked like a child's toy, but every detail was crystal clear. He'd spent the previous evening memorizing the layout, identifying key positions, and calculating environmental factors. The assault began with typical coalition efficiency. Dropships deployed the strike teams at multiple points around the facility's perimeter, while aerial platforms provided suppressing fire. The aliens moved with practiced coordination, their energy shields shimmering as they advanced. Chen watched through his scope as the first wave of plasma fire struck the facility's defensive positions. For a moment, it seemed like the attack would be over quickly. Several insurgent positions simply vanished in brilliant flashes of superheated gas. Then the adaptive shields kicked in. What the? Lieutenant Krexlin's voice crackled over the comm. My shots aren't penetrating anymore. Confirmed, came Captain Veltar's mechanical tones. Enemy shields are adapting faster than anticipated, switching to secondary frequencies. But even as the coalition forces cycled through different weapon configurations, the insurgents' defenses continued to evolve. What had started as a coordinated assault quickly devolved into a costly stalemate, with alien soldiers pinned down behind cover as return fire intensified. Chen remained motionless, watching and waiting. His rifle lay steady on its bipod, the crosshairs of his scope tracking movement within the facility. He could see insurgent commanders moving between positions, coordinating their defense, but he held his fire. Not yet. Casualties mounting, Commander Zixtal reported, his voice strained. We need to reassess our approach. Sir? Chen's quiet voice cut through the tactical chatter. I have eyes on 3 high-value targets. Permission to engage? With what? Your antique projectile weapon? The enemy shields will absorb kinetic energy just as easily as plasma bursts. Respectfully, sir, those shields are designed for energy weapons. They might not be as effective against traditional ballistics. A pause. Very well, Sergeant, but don't expect miracles from that museum piece. Chen had already been tracking his first target, an insurgent leader coordinating defensive positions from behind what appeared to be solid cover. The alien was visible only through a gap less than 2 centimeters wide between 2 metal plates. But Chen had learned patience from masters who measured their shots in heartbeats. He controlled his breathing, feeling the natural pause between inhale and exhale. The crosshairs settled. Wind speed, minimal. Range, 28-47 meters. Target moving left to right at approximately 0.3 meters per second. The rifle bucked against his shoulder with familiar authority. The tungsten core projectile crossed the distance in less than 4 seconds, passing through the impossibly narrow gap to strike the insurgent commander's center mass. Confirmed kill, Chen reported calmly. Target 1 eliminated. Silence filled the comm channel. Through his scope, Chen could see the confusion in the insurgent ranks as their coordinator suddenly disappeared from view. How is that possible? Captain Veltar's voice carried notes of disbelief. The target was completely behind cover. Not completely, sir. Moving to target 2. The second target was a heavy weapons specialist operating what appeared to be a coalition plasma cannon from a fortified position. The insurgent was partially protected by adaptive shielding, but Chen had noticed a pattern in the energy field's fluctuations. This shot required different timing. He waited, watching the shield generators cycle through their adaptive sequences. There, a microsecond gap as the system recalibrated for a new energy frequency. The second shot took the heavy weapons operator through the throat, the projectile arriving in the brief window when the shields were offline. The plasma cannon fell silent. 2 for 2, Chen reported, engaging target 3. The third target was the most challenging, an insurgent sniper who had been picking off coalition forces from a concealed position nearly 3 kilometers away on the opposite side of the facility. The target was well hidden and only occasionally visible through Chen's scope. But patience was a hunter's greatest weapon. Chen waited, controlling his breathing, feeling his heartbeat slow to a steady rhythm. He watched the insurgent's position for nearly 10 minutes before detecting the subtle movement that indicated the enemy sniper was preparing to engage another coalition soldier. The crosshairs settled, range 327 meters. Wind speed increasing to 2.3 meters per second from the southeast. Target exposure time, estimated 1.2 seconds. Chen's finger found the trigger's natural breakpoint and applied steady pressure. The shot was perfect. Target 3 eliminated, he reported as the distant insurgent sniper toppled from his concealed position, beginning area reconnaissance for additional high-value targets. The comm channel remained silent for several seconds before Commander Zixtal's voice returned, carrying a note of grudging respect. Sergeant Chen, how are you achieving these ranges without computer assistance? Training, sir, and this rifle shoots where I aim it. As coalition forces began to advance once more, taking advantage of the chaos Chen had created in the insurgent command structure, the mockery from earlier that morning seemed like a distant memory. The aliens were beginning to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary, a warrior who needed no technology beyond his skill and an old rifle that had been killing enemies since before some of their species had achieved spaceflight. The assault was far from over, but the tone had shifted. The human sniper was no longer just an observer. The art of patience. 23 years earlier, Earth. Breathe, Marcus. Don't fight the rifle. Become part of it. 12-year-old Marcus Chen lay prone on the hillside overlooking his grandfather's ranch, the oversized training rifle nearly as long as he was tall. Master Gunnery Sergeant William Chen, retired Marine sniper, knelt beside his grandson with the patience of someone who understood that mastery came not from technology, but from countless hours of disciplined practice. Feel your heartbeat, the old Marine continued. Between beats is where you'll find your moment. The rifle doesn't know the difference between a practice target and an enemy soldier, but you do. Every shot matters because every shot is a decision. Young Marcus struggled to control his breathing, his small frame fighting against the weapon's weight. Grandpa, why don't we just use the smart rifles like they have in the military now? William Chen's weathered face creased into a smile. Because, boy, what happens when the computers fail? When the power runs out? When the enemy has jammers that make all your fancy electronics worthless? He tapped the rifle's wooden stock. This rifle will work in a sandstorm, underwater, in space, or in the depths of hell itself. It doesn't need batteries or updates or maintenance contracts. It just needs you to be worthy of it. Present day, Kepler 442b. The memory faded as Chen adjusted his position slightly, feeling the familiar weight of his grandfather's rifle against his shoulder. The coalition assault had stalled again, this time due to a new problem. The insurgents had deployed jamming fields that were interfering with the aliens' targeting systems and communications. Systems compromised, Captain Veltar reported, his voice distorted by electronic interference. Targeting computers are offline, switching to manual acquisition. Chen almost smiled. Manual acquisition, something humans had never stopped training for, but which the coalition forces treated as a backup option at best. Through his scope, he watched alien soldiers struggle to aim weapons designed to be operated by computer assistants. Sergeant Chen, Commander Zixtal's voice cut through the static. Are you experiencing equipment malfunctions? Negative, sir. All systems operational. All systems? How is that possible with the jamming field active? Sir, my primary targeting system is biological. The jamming isn't affecting my eyes. Chen had been watching the insurgent positions for over 2 hours, noting patterns in their movement, identifying key personnel, and mapping the facility's defenses through pure observation. While the alien forces relied on electronic intelligence gathering, he used the oldest intelligence collection method in existence: patient surveillance. He'd identified 17 high-value targets, mapped 3 potential escape routes the insurgents might use, and calculated the most efficient sequence for eliminating enemy leadership, all without a single computer calculation. I have a shot on the insurgent field commander, Chen reported. Center courtyard behind the communications array. Range, 2934 meters. We can't see anything through this interference, Lieutenant Krexlon replied. How can you identify specific targets? The commander has been coordinating defensive positions for the last 40 minutes. He's taller than the others, carries different equipment, and the other insurgents defer to him. Classic leadership indicators. Chen had been tracking the commander's movement pattern, timing his brief appearances between covered positions. The insurgent was disciplined, never exposing himself for more than a few seconds at a time, but discipline created predictability. The crosshairs settled on empty space, a gap between 2 shipping containers where Chen calculated the commander would appear in approximately 12 seconds based on his established pattern. 10 seconds. Chen controlled his breathing. 8 seconds. Heartbeat steady at 62 beats per minute. 5 seconds. Wind speed holding constant at 1.8 meters per second. 3 seconds. The natural pause between breaths. The insurgent commander appeared exactly where Chen had predicted, moving with the same steady pace he'd maintained for the past hour. The tungsten projectile was waiting for him. Target eliminated, Chen reported as the insurgent leader crumpled. Enemy command structure compromised. The effect was immediate. Without their commander's coordination, the insurgent defense began to fragment. Disciplined firing positions became individual survival efforts. The adaptive shielding systems, deprived of centralized control, began operating with conflicting parameters. Remarkable, Captain Veltar observed as coalition forces began to advance again. How did you predict his location so precisely? Pattern recognition, sir. Humans excel at identifying behavioral patterns even under stress. It's an evolutionary adaptation. What Chen didn't mention was the hundreds of hours he'd spent learning this skill, not from computers or training simulators, but from his grandfather and father, who had passed down knowledge earned through 3 generations of combat: the ability to read terrain, predict movement, and understand human behavior through careful observation. Another memory surfaced, his father explaining how to track wounded game through difficult terrain. The animal thinks it's being random, son, but pain and fear create patterns too. Everything alive follows patterns, you just have to be patient enough to see them. Chen shifted his attention to a new target, an insurgent demolitions expert who had been placing charges at key structural points throughout the facility. The target was attempting to destroy evidence and eliminate potential escape routes for coalition forces, but his placement pattern revealed both his expertise and his intended extraction point. Sir, I have eyes on a demo specialist preparing to collapse the main access tunnel. If he succeeds, we'll lose our primary ingress route. Can you take the shot? Negative, sir. He's behind solid cover, but I can predict where he'll move next based on his placement pattern. He needs to reach the northwest corner to complete his demolition sequence. Chen had been watching the demolitions expert work for 20 minutes, noting the careful, professional way he placed charges for maximum structural damage. The insurgent was following textbook procedures, which made him predictable. I'll have a 3-second window when he moves to the final position, Chen calculated aloud. Range will be 33-40 meters with a 15-degree elevation change. Doable, but I'll need to compensate for the facility's internal air circulation creating thermal currents. Thermal currents? Commander Zixtal sounded skeptical. How can you possibly calculate such variables without atmospheric sensors? Experience, sir. The heat shimmer patterns visible through my scope indicate air movement. My grandfather taught me to read thermal signatures during desert training. Chen settled into his shooting position, becoming as still as the rocks around him. This would be his longest shot of the engagement, requiring absolute precision and perfect timing. The demolitions expert was thorough and careful, exactly the kind of professionalism that created exploitable patterns. The crosshairs tracked empty space once again as Chen waited for his target to appear. Patience was more than just waiting. It was the confidence to know that preparation and skill would converge at exactly the right moment. The insurgent appeared precisely where Chen had calculated, moving with the measured pace of someone focused entirely on his technical task. He never saw the bullet that ended his mission. Demo specialist eliminated, Chen reported. Facility demolition sequence terminated. As coalition forces resumed their advance with renewed confidence, Chen remained motionless on his rocky perch, scanning for the next threat. The aliens were beginning to understand that their human observer possessed capabilities that no amount of technology could replicate: the patience to wait, the skill to observe, and the precision to act when the moment was perfect. Precision under fire. The insurgents had finally located Chen's position. "Sniper fire incoming," Lieutenant Krexelon's panicked voice crackled over the comm as energy bolts began impacting the rocks around Chen's concealed position. "Human, you need to relocate immediately." Chen remained motionless behind his rifle, watching through his scope as muzzle flashes erupted from at least 6 different positions within the mining facility. The insurgents had triangulated his location using the sound signatures from his previous shots and were now focusing concentrated fire on his rocky outcrop. Energy bolts superheated the air around him, and kinetic rounds sparked off stone surfaces, sending razor-sharp fragments spinning through the space he occupied. Any reasonable soldier would have immediately sought better cover or relocated to a secondary position. But Chen had learned patience from masters who understood that sometimes the best defense was absolute stillness. "Sergeant Chen, respond." Commander Zixtal's voice carried genuine concern. "Your position is compromised. Fall back to safe distance." "Negative, sir," Chen replied calmly, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "I have clear sight lines on multiple targets, engaging." Through his scope, Chen could see the insurgents firing wildly in his general direction, their shots guided more by anger than precision. They knew approximately where he was, but approximately wasn't good enough at 3-kilometer range. Their energy weapons were designed for closer engagement distances, and their ballistic weapons lacked the precision for effective counter-sniper work. But more importantly, their focus on him was drawing them into exposed positions. Chen's first return shot took an insurgent sniper who had been leaning out from behind cover to get a better angle on the human's position. The tungsten projectile arrived before the sound of the shot, dropping the enemy before he even knew he was being targeted. "One down," Chen reported, already tracking his second target. The key to surviving counter-battery fire was understanding the difference between cover and concealment. The insurgents could see his muzzle flash and the general area of his position, but the specific rock formation Chen had selected provided multiple firing angles while keeping his actual location ambiguous. His second shot eliminated an insurgent who had been directing fire from what he thought was a protected position. The bullet passed through a gap in the facility's structural supports that the enemy hadn't even realized existed. "Two down. Continuing engagement." "This is insane," Captain Veltar observed, his optical sensors tracking the energy discharges impacting around Chen's position. "The volume of fire directed at your location should have eliminated you minutes ago." "Cover versus concealment, sir," Chen explained while chambering another round. "They know I'm here, but they don't know exactly where here is." The alien forces had taken shelter as the insurgent attention focused on the lone human sniper, but they were witnessing something that contradicted everything they understood about modern warfare. A single soldier, armed with what they considered primitive equipment, was calmly engaging multiple targets while under intense fire. Chen's third shot was his most audacious yet. One of the insurgents had taken position behind a damaged hover tank, using its bulk for protection while directing fire at the human's location. The tank's armor would stop any conventional projectile, but Chen had noticed something the insurgent hadn't: a small drainage port in the vehicle's undercarriage, barely 3 centimeters wide. The angle was nearly impossible, requiring the bullet to pass through the port and ricochet off the tank's internal structure to reach the target. It was the kind of shot that existed more in theory than practice, requiring perfect calculation of trajectory, deflection angles, and projectile integrity after impact. Chen made the calculation in seconds, adjusting for the metallic composition of the tank's interior structure and the projectile's likely behavior after the ricochet. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "A bullet is just a tool, Marcus. Sometimes you need to use tools creatively." The shot took nearly 5 seconds to complete its complex path through the drainage port, off 2 interior surfaces, and into the insurgent who thought he was safely concealed behind 2 meters of armored steel. "Target eliminated via ricochet shot," Chen reported matter-of-factly. The comm channel fell silent. Even for seasoned coalition veterans, the concept of a deliberately planned ricochet shot at 3-kilometer range bordered on the impossible. "Ricochet?" Commander Zixtal's voice carried disbelief. "You intentionally calculated a deflection shot at that range?" "Yes, sir. Old technique. Sometimes the direct path isn't available, so you create an indirect one." But Chen's most challenging moment was yet to come. Through his scope, he spotted movement in the facility's civilian housing section. Insurgents had taken hostages and were using them as human shields while preparing to eliminate captured coalition personnel. I have eyes on a hostage situation, Chen reported. 5 insurgents using civilians as cover. They appear to be preparing to execute captured friendly forces. Rules of engagement prohibit firing into civilian areas, Captain Veltar responded immediately. Risk to non-combatants is unacceptable. Chen watched through his scope as the insurgents forced several coalition prisoners to their knees. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, but the insurgents had positioned themselves cleverly. Any shot that missed its target would likely hit a civilian. But Chen had been trained by warriors who understood that sometimes impossible shots were the only moral choice. Sir, I have a solution. Permission to engage. Absolutely not, Sergeant. The risk. Sir? Chen interrupted quietly. I have a clear shot on the insurgent leader's weapon. If I can disable his rifle without hitting him, it might create enough confusion for the hostages to escape. The shot was absurd, targeting a rifle in an insurgent's hands while avoiding hitting the insurgent himself or any of the nearby civilians. The margin of error was measured in millimeters, and even a perfect hit might cause the weapon to explode in the insurgent's hands, potentially injuring bystanders. But Chen had learned from masters who believed that precision was not just about hitting targets, it was about hitting exactly the right part of the target. The crosshairs settled on the insurgent's rifle, specifically on the weapon's power coupling, a component that would disable the rifle without creating an explosion. Range, 156 meters, multiple moving obstacles, civilian safety paramount. Chen controlled his breathing, feeling the familiar pause between heartbeats. This wasn't just marksmanship, this was surgery at extreme range. The tungsten projectile struck the rifle's power coupling with surgical precision, disabling the weapon and sending it spinning from the insurgent's grasp. The sudden failure of his equipment caught the insurgent completely off guard, and in that moment of confusion, the hostages broke free and coalition prisoners overpowered their captors. Hostage situation resolved, Chen reported. Civilian casualties, 0. As the immediate crisis passed and coalition forces resumed their advance, the aliens' attitude toward their human observer had undergone a fundamental shift. What had begun as mockery for primitive equipment had evolved into something approaching awe. Sergeant Chen, Commander Zixtal's voice carried a tone of newfound respect. Request permission to observe your shooting techniques firsthand after this operation concludes. Of course, sir. Always happy to share knowledge with fellow soldiers. But Chen remained focused on his scope, scanning for the next threat. The battle was far from over, and somewhere in the facility, insurgent leaders were probably planning their next move. The hunt continued. The turning point. The insurgents' counterattack came at dawn. Chen had been in position for 18 hours, surviving on combat rations and water from his pack while maintaining overwatch on the mining facility. His ammunition count was running low, only 37 rounds remaining from the 200 he'd started with, but every shot had found its target. Multiple contacts inbound from the eastern approach. Captain Veltar's voice carried urgent alarm as his sensors detected the approaching force. At least 100 insurgents with heavy weapons. This appears to be their main force. Through his scope, Chen could see them, a well-coordinated assault force moving with military precision toward the coalition positions. These weren't the facility defenders his previous targets had come from. This was a professional military unit, probably the insurgents' core fighting force responding to the threat against their stronghold. Coalition forces, prepare for defensive positions, Commander Zixtal ordered. All units fall back to prepared fighting positions. But the coalition forces were caught in terrible tactical position. The assault on the mining facility had left them spread out and exposed, with limited cover against a fresh enemy force that outnumbered them 3-1. Worse, the insurgent relief force was equipped with military-grade equipment including portable shield generators and heavy plasma cannons. Chen watched the developing disaster through his scope with the calm assessment his grandfather had taught him. Sir, requesting permission to provide precision fire support. Negative, Sergeant. Conserve your ammunition for high-value targets. We may need to extract under fire. But Chen could see what the electronic sensors couldn't. The insurgent force had a command structure, a plan, and key personnel whose elimination could disrupt their entire operation. The relief force was organized around squad leaders who were coordinating movement through hand signals and tactical positioning. Sir, I can break their attack formation, but I need to engage immediately before they reach optimal assault positions. Sergeant Chen, you have less than 40 rounds remaining. We cannot waste them on speculative shots. Chen had already identified his first target, the insurgent commander coordinating the assault from a mobile command vehicle approximately 2,800 meters away. The vehicle was heavily armored and shielded, but Chen had noticed that its commander was directing operations from an exposed cupola position. Without waiting for permission, Chen settled his crosshairs on the target. This shot would violate direct orders, but sometimes soldiers had to choose between obedience and victory. The tungsten projectile punched through the command vehicle's open hatch and eliminated the insurgent commander before he could complete his assault coordination. The effect on enemy operations was immediate. Squad movements became less coordinated, and their advance faltered as subordinate commanders tried to establish new control protocols. "Sergeant Chen!" Commander Zixtal's voice carried anger and disbelief. "You fired against direct orders." "Yes, sir. Enemy commander eliminated. Their assault formation is fragmenting." Chen was already tracking his second target, a heavy weapons specialist setting up a plasma cannon that could devastate coalition positions. Range 3,240 meters. Wind speed increasing as morning thermal currents developed. This shot pushed his rifle to its absolute maximum effective range. The tungsten projectile would be fighting gravity, wind drift, and atmospheric density over its 4-second flight time. But Chen had made similar shots during training exercises in Earth's mountains, where thin air and unpredictable wind conditions created similar challenges. The heavy weapons operator dropped just as his plasma cannon reached full charge, the weapon's energy discharge firing harmlessly into the ground. A potential disaster for coalition forces had been averted by a single precisely placed bullet. "Two down," Chen reported, continuing engagement. "Incredible," Lieutenant Krexlon observed. "The enemy assault is losing cohesion. How is one sniper disrupting an entire company's strength attack?" "Leadership," Chen replied while chambering another round. "Remove the leaders and the followers become confused. Basic small unit tactics." But the insurgents were adapting. Chen watched through his scope as enemy forces began to spread out more, avoiding predictable formations and using more sophisticated cover techniques. They had identified the threat and were responding professionally. Chen's third target was an insurgent signal specialist who was attempting to re-establish command control through portable communication equipment. The specialist was operating from behind solid cover, but Chen had learned patience from masters who understood that everyone eventually makes mistakes. The insurgent exposed himself for less than 2 seconds while adjusting his antenna array, barely enough time for most shooters to acquire the target, let alone make a precise shot. But Chen had been tracking the position for 12 minutes, and his crosshairs were already waiting when the target appeared. "Communications specialist eliminated," Chen reported. "Enemy coordination further degraded." The pattern continued for the next hour. Chen systematically eliminated key personnel from the insurgent relief force, squad leaders, technical specialists, heavy weapons operators, and anyone who appeared to be coordinating tactical movements. Each shot was calculated not just for immediate effect, but for maximum disruption to enemy operations. By the time Chen had fired his 28th round of the engagement, the insurgent counterattack had completely stalled. What had begun as a coordinated assault by a superior force had devolved into scattered groups of confused soldiers seeking cover while trying to understand why their leadership kept disappearing. "Remarkable tactical effect," Captain Veltar observed, his optical sensors analyzing the battlefield. "A single shooter has neutralized an entire company's offensive capability." But Chen's most critical shot was yet to come. Through his scope, he spotted movement in the facility's main complex. Insurgent leaders were attempting to escape through a concealed exit, carrying what appeared to be stolen coalition technology and intelligence materials. "High-value targets attempting extraction from the facility," Chen reported. 3 individuals carrying classified materials toward hidden transport. The range was extreme. 347 meters to the extraction point, well beyond his rifle's normal effective range. Worse, the targets would only be exposed for seconds as they moved from the facility to their transport vehicle. "That's beyond maximum effective range," Commander Zixtal observed. "Even if you could make the shot, the projectile will have lost too much energy to guarantee elimination." Chen studied the tactical situation through his scope. The insurgent leaders were moving with practiced efficiency, using cover and concealment techniques that suggested professional military training, but they were also following an escape plan, which meant predictable movement patterns. "Sir, I have a solution, but it requires a ricochet shot off the transport vehicle's hull. If I can time it correctly, the deflected projectile will have sufficient energy to engage the targets." "A ricochet shot at nearly 4 kilometers? That's impossible." Chen had already calculated the angles. The insurgent transport was positioned against a rocky cliff face, creating a natural backstop that would contain any missed shots. The vehicle's hull was composed of standard coalition armor plating, which he knew would produce predictable deflection characteristics. Engaging, Chen announced, settling into his final shooting position of the engagement. This shot would consume nearly half his remaining ammunition. He would fire 3 rounds in sequence, calculating that the first shot would determine precise deflection angles, the second would refine his calculations, and the third would achieve the desired effect. The first tungsten projectile struck the transport vehicle's hull at the calculated angle, creating a shower of sparks and confirming Chen's trajectory calculations. The deflected bullet missed the insurgent leaders by less than a meter, close enough to verify his approach but not close enough to achieve the mission. Chen adjusted his aim by 2 degrees, compensating for the hull's actual deflection characteristics rather than theoretical values. The second shot struck with improved precision, the deflected projectile passing between 2 of the insurgent leaders and impacting the cliff face behind them. The insurgents began to realize they were under fire from an impossible range, but their escape protocol demanded they continue moving toward the transport. Chen's third shot was perfect. The tungsten projectile struck the vehicle's hull at exactly the right angle, deflecting upward at the precise trajectory needed to intercept the lead insurgent as he reached for the transport's entry hatch. The deflected bullet retained just enough energy to achieve a clean elimination. Target eliminated, Chen reported. Enemy leadership neutralized. The remaining insurgent leaders abandoned their escape attempt and surrendered immediately, recognizing that they were facing an enemy whose capabilities exceeded anything in their experience. Unbelievable, Lieutenant Krexlin whispered over the comm. He made a ricochet shot at 4 kilometers. I've never seen anything like it. As coalition forces moved in to secure the facility and captured insurgents, Chen finally allowed himself to relax slightly. His ammunition count was down to 9 rounds, but the engagement was effectively over. The insurgent force had been defeated not through superior technology or overwhelming firepower, but through the precise application of skill and patience. Sergeant Chen, Commander Zixtal's voice carried a tone Chen had never heard from the Zephyrian before, something approaching reverence. Request immediate debrief on your engagement techniques. Command needs to understand how a single soldier achieved such tactical impact. Of course, sir, but first, I'd like to check on our casualties and assist with prisoner processing. Chen began the careful process of securing his rifle and equipment, each movement deliberate and practiced. Around him, coalition forces were advancing with renewed confidence, their alien forms moving with precision through the mining facility they had thought impossible to take. The morning sun cast long shadows across the battlefield, illuminating the scene of a victory that would be remembered throughout the galaxy. The day a human sniper with an antique rifle proved that sometimes the oldest weapons were still the most effective. But for Chen, it was simply another day at the office, another confirmation of the lessons his grandfather had taught him: patience, precision, and the understanding that technology was only as good as the warrior who wielded it. The counterattack had been broken, the facility secured, and the insurgent leadership eliminated. Mission accomplished. Respect earned. The aftermath of the battle brought an unusual quiet to the mining facility. Coalition forces moved efficiently through the complex, securing prisoners and recovering stolen technology, while medical teams tended to the surprisingly light casualties. The insurgent force that had threatened to overrun the operation lay scattered and demoralized, their leadership eliminated by a sniper they never saw. Chen descended from his rocky perch as the sun reached its zenith, his rifle secured and his gear packed with the same methodical care he'd shown throughout the 18-hour engagement. Every piece of equipment was accounted for, every surface cleaned, every component checked for wear or damage. Sergeant Chen, Commander Zixtal, approached with his entire command staff in tow, their various alien forms creating an unusual procession across the facility's main courtyard. We need to discuss what we witnessed today. Chen set down his rifle case and offered the traditional coalition salute. Sir, mission accomplished, facility secured, enemy leadership eliminated, casualties minimal. Yes, the mission parameters were met, Captain Veltar interjected, his optical sensors focusing intently on the human. But your methods, they contradict everything we understand about modern warfare doctrine. The alien officers gathered around Chen's equipment with the curiosity of scientists examining an artifact from an ancient civilization. Lieutenant Krexlin pointed at the rifle case with one of his 4 arms. May we examine your weapon? We need to understand how such primitive technology achieved such impossible results. Chen opened the case, revealing the rifle that had dominated the battlefield for nearly a day. In the bright sunlight, the weapon looked even more archaic compared to the sleek energy weapons carried by coalition forces. Wood, steel, and simple optics, materials that some of these alien civilizations had abandoned thousands of years ago. This is a human M2A4 precision rifle, Chen explained, lifting the weapon with practiced ease. It fires a 7.62mm tungsten core projectile using chemical propellant. Effective range is approximately 3 kilometers under optimal conditions. Captain Veltar's optical array whirred as he scanned the rifle's construction. No targeting computer, no auto-correction systems, no environmental compensation beyond basic scope adjustments. How do you achieve precision at extreme range? Training, sir, and understanding the weapon's capabilities. Chen demonstrated the rifle's operation, from loading a cartridge to the mechanical action of the bolt. Each component was explained in simple terms, but the alien's expressions grew increasingly bewildered. The projectile follows a ballistic trajectory, Chen continued, affected by gravity, wind, air density, temperature, and range. The shooter must calculate all these variables and compensate accordingly. Calculate? Commander Zixtal's neck frills flared in confusion. Without computer assistance? How is such calculation possible? Experience, sir. After firing thousands of rounds under different conditions, the calculations become instinctive. Chen removed one of his remaining cartridges and passed it around for examination. The alien studied the simple brass case and tungsten projectile with the fascination typically reserved for archaeological discoveries. This is hand-loaded ammunition, Chen explained. Each cartridge is individually prepared for optimal performance. The powder charge is measured precisely, the projectile weight verified, the case dimensions checked. No two rounds are identical to factory specifications, but each one is optimized for this specific rifle. Lieutenant Krexlon held the cartridge up to the light, his 4 eyes examining every detail. You prepare each projectile individually? How long does such preparation require? About 6 minutes per round for match-grade ammunition, but the precision is worth the time investment. The aliens exchanged glances that clearly communicated their amazement. The concept of manually preparing each round of ammunition was as foreign to them as their energy weapons were to Chen. Sergeant, Captain Veltar addressed Chen with newfound formality. We owe you an apology. We underestimated both your capabilities and the effectiveness of human military doctrine. No apology necessary, sir. Every military tradition has its strengths. But we must understand, Commander Zixtal insisted. How did you achieve that Ricochet shot at 4 kilometers? Our trajectory computers indicate such a shot is mathematically impossible. Chen smiled slightly, remembering his grandfather's lessons about creative problem-solving. Sir, the shot wasn't impossible. It just required understanding projectile behavior after impact. The tungsten core retains most of its energy after deflection off steel surfaces, and the deflection angle can be calculated based on impact angle and surface composition. You calculated deflection physics without computer assistance? Yes, sir. It's an old technique. Hunters on Earth have been using ricochet shots for centuries to reach game in difficult positions. The revelation that Chen's impossible shots were based on hunting techniques rather than military science seemed to disturb the aliens even more. Their civilizations had long ago abandoned primitive hunting in favor of automated food production, and the idea that such ancient skills could have military applications was revolutionary. There's something else we need to discuss, Captain Veltar said, his tone becoming more serious. During the engagement, you fired against direct orders when you eliminated the insurgent commander. In coalition military doctrine, such disobedience would result in court-martial. Chen nodded, understanding the gravity of the accusation. Yes, sir. I violated orders and accept full responsibility. However, Commander Zixtal continued, your disobedience directly resulted in mission success and minimal coalition casualties. We need to understand your decision-making process. Sir, I assess that the insurgent commander's elimination would have greater tactical value than ammunition conservation. The shot disrupted their entire assault formation and saved coalition lives. But you made that assessment against the judgment of your superior officers. Chen considered his response carefully. Sir, I was trained to think tactically, not just to follow orders. Sometimes battlefield conditions require immediate decisions that can't wait for command authorization. Chen considered his response carefully. Sir, I was trained to think tactically, not just to follow orders. Sometimes battlefield conditions require immediate decisions that can't wait for command authorization. The aliens pondered this concept, the idea that individual soldiers might need to make independent tactical decisions based on their assessment of rapidly changing conditions. Coalition doctrine emphasized centralized command and control, with individual units following detailed instructions from higher headquarters. This suggests fundamental differences in our military philosophies, Captain Veltar observed. Coalition forces rely on coordination and technological superiority. Human forces appear to emphasize individual initiative and adaptability. Both approaches have their merits, sir, but sometimes old-fashioned human intuition can complement advanced technology. As the debriefing continued, more coalition personnel gathered to observe the discussion. Word of Chen's performance had spread throughout the force, and alien soldiers who had mocked him that morning now studied his equipment and techniques with intense interest. Sergeant Chen, Commander Zixtal said finally, I'm recommending you for the Coalition Distinguished Service Medal and requesting that you remain with our unit as a permanent advisor on human military techniques. Thank you, sir, but I'd prefer to continue serving as a regular soldier rather than an advisor. Nevertheless, we want to learn from your methods. Would you be willing to provide training to our sniper specialists? Chen glanced at his rifle, thinking of his grandfather's words about sharing knowledge with fellow warriors. Of course, sir, always happy to share what I've learned. As the sun began to set over the mining facility, Chen found himself surrounded by alien soldiers eager to understand the techniques that had turned the tide of battle. The mockery from that morning seemed like a distant memory, replaced by genuine respect and curiosity. But for Chen, the most important lesson wasn't about marksmanship or tactics. It was about the value of preserving traditional skills in an age of advancing technology. Sometimes the oldest methods were not just effective but essential. The rifle that had belonged to his grandfather would soon become the foundation for a new chapter in coalition military doctrine, proving that even in the far future, there was still a place for ancient wisdom on the modern battlefield. The Hunter's Legacy. 6 months later. The Coalition Sniper Training Facility on Kepler 442b bore little resemblance to the temporary military base where Chen had first been mocked by alien soldiers. Sprawling across several square kilometers of varied terrain, the facility featured ranges extending to 5 kilometers, environmental simulation chambers, and specialized training areas designed to test marksmanship skills under extreme conditions. Chen stood at the primary observation deck, watching as the facility's first graduating class of alien snipers prepared for their final qualification exercise. Below him, representatives from 12 different coalition species worked with weapons that blended human ballistic principles with advanced alien technology. Remarkable transformation, Commander Zixtal observed, joining Chen at the observation deck. The Zephyrian commander had become one of Chen's most dedicated students, trading his energy-based weapons for a modified ballistic rifle designed for his species' unique physiology. Yes, sir. They've adapted the techniques faster than I expected. The training program had evolved from Chen's simple offer to share knowledge into a comprehensive doctrine that was revolutionizing coalition military thinking. Human concepts of individual initiative, environmental awareness, and technological independence were being integrated with alien precision and coordination. Your species has given us something we didn't realize we were missing, Captain Veltar added, his optical sensors tracking the student snipers below. The ability to function effectively without technological dependence. Chen watched as a young Karathi sniper lined up for a challenging shot at 2,800 meters. The crystalline being had initially struggled with the concept of breathing control, lacking lungs in the human sense, but had adapted the technique to his species' unique physiology. The shot was clean and precise, a perfect center mass hit on a target that would have been impossible for coalition forces just months earlier. Contact from command, Lieutenant Krexlon announced, approaching with a data pad in one of his 4 hands. The first human-trained coalition sniper teams have completed successful operations on 3 different worlds. Enemy forces are reporting significant disruption from what they're calling ghost shooters. Chen smiled at the term. His grandfather would have appreciated the psychological impact of an enemy that struck without warning and disappeared without trace, the essence of effective sniper operations. There's more, Krexlon continued. Command is requesting expansion of the program. They want human-style training integrated into basic coalition military doctrine, not just specialized sniper units. Sir, Chen addressed Commander Zixtal. That's a significant expansion from what we originally discussed. The results speak for themselves, Sergeant. Coalition forces trained in human techniques are demonstrating improved battlefield effectiveness across all mission types. Your concepts of individual initiative and environmental adaptation are proving valuable beyond sniper operations. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Alien soldiers who had initially struggled with the concept of manual calculations were now demonstrating intuitive understanding of ballistics, wind compensation, and range estimation. More importantly, they were learning to think independently, making tactical decisions based on immediate assessment rather than waiting for computer analysis. There is one concern, Captain Veltar noted. Some coalition commanders worry that emphasizing individual initiative might undermine unit cohesion and command authority. Chen nodded, understanding the concern. Sir, the goal isn't to replace command structure, but to create soldiers who can act effectively when communication is compromised or when immediate decisions are required. It's about expanding capabilities, not undermining discipline. Perhaps a demonstration would be appropriate, Commander Zixtal suggested. Show them how individual initiative supports rather than threatens unit effectiveness. Below them, the graduation exercise was reaching its climax. The alien snipers were engaging targets in a complex scenario that required coordination, communication, and individual decision-making. Each shooter had to adapt to changing conditions while supporting their teammates' efforts. Chen watched with pride as the students he'd trained demonstrated skills that would have been impossible for coalition forces just months earlier. A Vextai sniper made a precise shot through environmental obstacles that would have challenged even veteran human marksmen. A Zephyrian team coordinated overlapping fields of fire with the kind of instinctive understanding that usually took years to develop. Graduation exercise complete, the range officer announced. All objectives achieved with 0 casualties and minimal ammunition expenditure. The success rate was extraordinary. Alien species that had never used ballistic weapons were now achieving proficiency levels that rivaled veteran human snipers. But more importantly, they were demonstrating the independence and adaptability that made human forces effective in diverse conditions. There's something else we need to discuss, Commander Zixtal said, his tone becoming more formal. Coalition Command has approved the establishment of a permanent human-alien military exchange program. They're requesting that you lead the initiative. Chen considered the implications. The program would formalize what had begun as simple knowledge sharing into a systematic integration of human and alien military doctrines. It represented a fundamental shift in how coalition forces approached warfare. What would my role be, sir? Director of Tactical Innovation. You'd work with military leaders from all coalition species to identify areas where human techniques could enhance alien capabilities, and vice versa. The goal is comprehensive doctrine integration, not just sniper training. Chen thought of his grandfather's words about sharing knowledge with fellow warriors. The old Marine had believed that good soldiers learned from everyone they fought alongside, regardless of species or background. I accept, sir, but I have one condition, which is, I want to maintain active field status, no permanent desk assignments. The best way to develop and test new techniques is in actual combat conditions. Commander Zixtal's neck frills flared in what Chen had learned indicated amusement. Agreed, though I suspect you'll find yourself busier than you anticipate. As the day's training concluded and alien soldiers cleaned their weapons with the methodical care Chen had taught them, he reflected on how far they'd all come. The mockery that had greeted his arrival had been replaced by genuine respect and eagerness to learn. But the most important change wasn't in their marksmanship or tactics. It was in their understanding that military effectiveness came not from technology alone, but from the warrior who wielded it. They had learned that sometimes the oldest methods were not just effective, but essential. Sergeant Chen, a young Karathi sniper, approached with his rifle case. Could you check my weapon maintenance? I want to ensure I'm following proper procedures. Chen examined the alien's ballistic rifle, a hybrid design that combined human principles with Karathi engineering. The weapon was immaculately maintained, every surface clean, every component properly lubricated. Excellent work, Chen approved. Your grandfather would be proud. The Karathi's optical sensors brightened. He understood the significance of the comment. Among the many human concepts the aliens had adopted was the importance of military tradition and the passing of knowledge from generation to generation. As the twin sons of Kepler 442b sat over the training facility, Chen cleaned his own rifle with the same careful attention his grandfather had taught him decades earlier. The weapon that had once been mocked as a primitive antique was now the foundation for a new era of coalition military doctrine. The rifle would continue to serve, as it had served 3 generations of his family, proving that sometimes the oldest tools were indeed the sharpest. But now it would serve alongside alien weapons and alien warriors who understood that effectiveness came not from the sophistication of technology, but from the skill and dedication of those who wielded it. The hunter's legacy would live on, carried forward by warriors from a dozen different worlds who had learned that patience, precision, and individual excellence were universal military virtues, regardless of species, regardless of technology, regardless of how far civilization advanced. In the end, Chen reflected, the best weapons were not the ones that thought for you, but the ones that allowed you to think for yourself. And that lesson, more than any marksmanship technique, would be his lasting contribution to the galaxy's military future. The old ways had found new life among the stars, proving that some truths were indeed universal, and that sometimes the most advanced military doctrine was simply remembering what had always worked. Mission accomplished. The end.